Welcome to Insider Events, What's Next? CEOs on how talent drives transformation. Presented by ProEdge, a PwC product. Here's our host, Insider Head of Editorial Special Projects, Julia Hood.
Hi, I'm Julia Hood. It's an honor to be your host for today's event on the future of work, presented by ProEdge, a PwC product. This is an important conversation to have right now. Business transformation has only accelerated in the pandemic. That puts pressure on companies to recruit and keep top talent and to reskill existing employees. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront of our culture, both inside and outside the office. And right now, companies of all kinds are figuring out the balance between in-office and hybrid workplaces. It's a topic that resonates with everyone. We would love for you to be part of the conversation by using the hashtag #InsiderEvents. Please share with us, are you going back to the office full-time, going hybrid, or staying remote? And how do you feel about the decisions that are being made by leadership? Share your responses with the hashtag #InsiderEvents. Also, in the dashboard at the bottom of the screen, you can submit questions for our panelists to take our event survey as well at any time. We'd love to know what you enjoyed most about today's event and what we could be doing better. And now, I'm delighted to introduce our first session. Tanya Dua, Insider Senior Reporter, is leading a conversation on the hybrid workplace. Over to you, Tanya.
The work week has looked the same for generations. Before the pandemic, that is. According to several recent surveys, almost 50% of respondents now want companies that allow for flexible work weeks. To discuss this new era of a hybrid work environment, joining me are Gail Hyman, CEO of Weber Shandwick, and Devika Bulchandani, North America CEO and Chairwoman at Ogilvy. Welcome, Gail. Welcome, Devika.
So good to be with my friend Gail Hyman.
Reunited, and it feels so good.
Reunited. So my first question to you is, New York is opening up. Where do you guys stand in terms of reopening of the offices?
New York is opening, and we are here in the flesh. So I'm totally glad for that and appreciate it. And it's funny you mentioned flexibility and new needs of the workforce, and people have been discussing this transforming workforce for years, eons, and here we are. Devika and I and a few others actually changing it. So it is an exciting time. Where we are is we will be opening up. It is likely we will be opening up in mid-fall. What we have done, we are open in places all around the world. We're a vast, like Ogilvy, we are a vast global network. So we are open in parts of Asia Pacific, and we are open in parts of Europe. We are not yet open in LATAM because of the reasons of a resurgence. And we are not yet open in North America. We have told our teams that we will give them ample time to resort the lives that they have been leading. So it is likely we will be opening our doors, given with CDC regulations, with local regulations, and with a lot of listening to our teams in mid-fall.
What about you guys, Devika?
Now, I think the one thing we've all learned during COVID is never make a plan. Anyway, having said that, we will also be opening in September in the US. And I think to echo a lot of what Gail was saying, there have been different aspects or different geographies where we've been open and then we've been closed and then we've been open and then we've been closed, and that's sort of the thing with COVID where you can't make a plan. In the US, we will open in September and get people back. We've also done the same thing. I think a lot of us have the same policies to give people ample notice. We have a plan in place for more of a flex work environment. And there's an added complication for us in New York because we're moving from what was called the Chocolate Factory to 205th, which is actually the Toy Design Center. Now it's the Toy Factory. So very similar again. Come early, mid-September, we'll be getting back to the office in some shape or form. And we can talk more details about that.
Moving from chocolate to toys, that's big.
Isn't that fun?
Big move.
Well,
I take
keep
either
the
one.
creative juices flowing, am I right?
Yeah.
So we talked about how nearly 50% of respondents of a recent survey, and plenty of surveys actually, demand that of their employers now. What does that sort of a hybrid work environment look like for Weber Shandwick?
So, it's interesting that I assume that's national data you're talking about. Weber-Shandwick data was give or take 3/4 of our teams, 3/4 of our individual around the world said flexibility is what they want. So on or about December 12, we announced that we were going to hybrid in perpetuity, a program called JUICE. Get it? It's about fluidity. It's called JUICE. And what that is it's 60-40. So for most people, we'll be very flexible, but for most people, that means 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. And while I know there's all kinds of talk about how hybrid works for others and what by job or by the kind of work you're doing on a given day, ours is super democratic for everyone across every title, no matter what he or she or they are doing. It is that kind of hybrid, 3 and 2. JUICE has other components too. We have deals on food, on health, on yoga, and all kinds of other things that help people in that hybrid work environment. There's a whole range of components that I think make it a little bit different, and the response has been great. So flexibility, in perpetuity, fully democratic. I should say the other thing that I think is really important about it, I mean, we talk a lot about carbon emissions and stuff like that. When we go to that kind of approach, it's not only affords flexibility, ideally super inclusive flexibility, which is a whole other component of the JUICE program.
We will get there.
Yeah, and we'll get there, I'm sure. But the other piece is when you take thousands of people and you change their commutation patterns and reduce them, each of them, by 2 days a week, you reduce your carbon emissions. So that's a big piece of JUICE as well.
What is the Ogilvy version called? Flow or something?
We've got actually 5 different elements in sort of our new plan. The first is how you work, which is also a 3-2 model, right? So I think everybody's looking at a 3-2 model. We're also looking at a 3-2 model, which is going to be fairly democratic in its need. There's another sort of interesting dynamic that comes into play when you think about how you work, is real estate footprints. And I think organizations in different markets, we've also shrunk our real estate footprint because that allows us to reinvest into different areas of the business and reinvest into our people and what they need going forward. So that's going to be a factor. Not every office in every region is doing it, but Gail, I'm sure you guys have thought about that some, and we're dealing with sort of the same issue. The second is where you work. So even the flexibility of, if I'm working in New York, do I have to be located in New York? Right? We've also found flex work means more than just how many days a week you are, but where you work.
The banks say you do,
right?
We've read that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole, there's that aspect to it, which is the second component. The third is who you work with. I think what we're finding is, as people are more lonely, you want to have cohorts. So we've actually launched 18 new ERGs, right? Every organization, again,
over the past year.
Yes, we've come to 18 now. So I think there were 7 or 8 earlier. But as the last year has unfolded, or the last 18 months, and different needs and different issues have arisen from an employee and stakeholder perspective, so we're up to 18 ERGs, because who you work with, having that sense of commonality becomes really important. Are you a veteran? Are you, is there a disability issue? Are you a working mother? Right? But that sort of sense of community when you've been sitting alone at home has become really important. So that's the third, which is who you work with. How you feel, which is not something that we, as an industry, we talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure we've been, how good we've been about really thinking about how people feel. So we have a program in that bucket called 100% You, which has, again, 4 components to it, which is, how do you feel about money? How do you feel about meals? How do you feel about movement? And how do you feel about your mind, mental health? And we have actually experts and outsiders coming in to do a program every Wednesday on one of those 4 issues. And then the last one is how you relax. And what we're going to institute is compulsory 3 days off every quarter.
Wow.
Because the US actually leaves over 400 million days on the table. And I know one of the things, and I know when I was at IPG, we talked about, going to a no vacation policy, as in take whatever you want. But what we're finding in conversations and in some of the data that we're seeing is people actually feel more pressure and they don't know what days to take off. Can I not? So what we're instituting now is 3 compulsory days off, because taking care of our minds and mental health is one of the biggest issues that's facing this nation and the biggest issues that's facing the workforce.
That's definitely a huge change, especially in an industry notorious for overworking its people. I want to turn the question around to the other end of that, though. We always talk about how important it is in the creative industries to be there in the same physical space for collaboration and creativity to thrive. How does the physical office space then evolve to sort of adapt to this sort of a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, I mean, there is no question. There is electricity when we're together in a room. Like, we could have been doing this panel on our laptops with little squares in it. Wouldn't have had the profound electricity.
I wouldn't get to hug you.
Right. There'd be no hugs. There'd be no electricity. So there's certainly value. I think we found, and I suspect Evica will agree, that we had extraordinary creative developed and made in this last period, right? I mean, it can happen, and I think there was a...
I mean, I think Cannes is witness to that. If you just think about the week we're in.
We've seen it in Cannes, and the virtual world was very democratic. Lots of people had voices. Lots of people shaped ideas. It was truly inclusive, and I think we've got to continue that. We got to retain that. That said, to get to the office space question, yeah, I think it makes sense that it will be a creative nexus. It will be a collaboration nexus. It will be a team nexus, whether one is on a creative side or whatever side of that business is on. Coming together as a team, if that team is within a single office, I think will be valuable. I think it remains to be seen. One of my colleagues said, the office of the future is just a cafe, like a cafe with a bunch of rooms, and people get together and they'll have lattes and they'll hang and they'll do whatever. Maybe it turns into something else in the evening, or maybe it's just a yoga studio, or maybe it's cafes plus a yoga studio. It will morph. I think what we are looking at now is betaing all kinds of technologies to be sure that those who are not in that office, in that nexus at the time, are included, because the FOMO thing is a big issue. So I think technology will compensate a bit. So when you're in the groovy banquette in one of our offices and hanging and having a random serendipitous meeting, you can call in your colleagues and they're there for everyone to see, not on a singular laptop. So I think we're looking at that. There are some terrific technology solutions. We're looking at all of them. But overall, I think, creative nexus, collaboration nexus, and for sure team nexus, and client and team nexus. So those are the things we're looking at.
To you, Devika, so you were talking about mandating 3 days off as a compulsory policy per quarter. What about the opposite of that? Would you have, for creative teams, you have to be in 2 days a week, or any policies around that to make sure that you're still fostering that sort of a collaborative work environment?
I think, what we're doing is going to a 3-2 model for everybody. Again, we have to dip our toe in the water, get back, and see how it works. Right? Nobody in the world's figured this out because it's never happened in the world before, and thankfully it didn't.
Yeah.
So we're going to learn, and then we're going to adapt to it. And that's one thing that we're being super transparent about. And I think that's just the reality. I'm not sure anybody has the answers. We've been really lucky in one thing, and I'd say this about Ogilvy, New York. We're moving. So when you're moving in this moment, you get to design a space for the future, which is easier to do than taking an existing space, right, and then redesigning it. So when we think about 205th, we're redesigning the whole space to be more fluid, to be more juicy, to take
It's good. I love it as an adjective.
Right, it's going to be more juicy. And they're not, it's not a fixed space, and it'll be a lot more like neighborhoods, which is you come into your neighborhood because you're not going to be there every day. And even looking at the design being more fluid. Mm-hmm. So can we move walls? Can we actually make things smaller and make things bigger? And it doesn't have to be just walls, but what do you do with bringing nature in? And what do you do with bringing different textures in? Having said all of that, which sounds really exciting, and the plans are underway because that office is not going to be fully ready till January, which all our teams know. The technology, to Gail's point, is going to make it or break it as we all collectively think about the future of work and the hybrid workplace. Because we've all had a very shared and democratic experience. It didn't matter who you were, where you were. We were all on Zoom and Teams and WebEx. And it was a shared experience with our clients, right? I do worry about a situation, which is you've got a client that's come into the office. We're all sitting around a table and we're ideating, right? And you're sitting there and you're talking. And our business is a business where ideas build, right? Where Gail says something and you go, wait a minute, you said something. And you think about it. Now, 7 of us are in a room together in this beautiful, juicy environment, and 3 are not. Yeah. And even if there's a technology, there's still a screen. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, we have the physical proximity and the electricity that goes with it. And as much as technology can do, there are still going to be people behind a screen. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to learn to live with it. Learn to
solve for it.
Or solve for it, right? Yeah. And the other bit of it is our own muscle memory. Because when I'm with you, when I'm talking to you, it's so much easier to do it and we build off each other. And then to go, hey, John, Joanna, what do you think?
Right.
That muscle memory that we're going to have to learn is going to be sort of a different thing. And we've all lived through this, right? Conference calls.
Nobody remembered the people on the phone. Hey, remember Harold? He's on the phone. You're like, oh, I forgot.
So both of you talked a lot about technology and how instrumental it's going to be moving forward. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue and that being a really big phenomenon. So what are some other technologies that you're considering, just as tangible examples?
Well, we're not to do shout outs for all the technology. We're looking at a lot of them. I do think there's a couple ways to look at it. One is what is the technology replacement for the video conference, the standard issue kind of Zoom, WebEx, Teams, etc. And there's other things out there more akin to gaming, right? So are we looking at some of those kinds of things? And I know other kinds of businesses are using those, some with reasonable success. So we're taking a look at that. There's a lot of discussion out there about multiplayer systems and synchronous and asynchronous, with Google Docs being an example of synchronous. So you got to do both, right? And we all have a bit of that, but the greatest opportunity to work together is in that single doc where you literally are working together and collaborating together. So to change a little bit of the gestalt of our organization, I think, to get to full-on synchronous, a little bit of asynchronous, but it's hard to drive that evolution. And at the same time, be looking at some of these systems that are a little bit more multi-dimensional than classic Zoom and Teams. And again, those systems have been great. They've been great for us. They've been great for our clients. God knows we've gone from platform to platform. I mean, I can spend a day not running out of the room, just going platform to platform to platform and hoping they all work. But those are all very similar. So I think the new age is going to be a little more immersive, a little more gaming-like, and those are the ones we're testing now.
Devika, I want to ask you about any sort of leadership or operational skills that you were forced to develop over the past year that you didn't have earlier. What would those be? And then how are you applying them to your colleagues, to your clients, to your stakeholders?
I mean, hell yes, right? Like if we didn't learn anything in the last year, then I don't know, all of us were sort of living under a rock. I mean, I think the first one that I'm going to talk about, which may sound almost cliched, is empathy. You see somebody on screen and it all seems okay because we're on screens and all I see is this, right? And I've had to really sort of think about, even when I sit with you right now, I can see that you're injured, right? I have cues for empathy to be triggered. But when all I'm seeing is this aspect of Gail, how do you intuit what's actually going on? Every single person was dealing with some form of trauma, some form of hardship. That's been something that I had to teach myself, which is when I can't visualize something, when I cannot see it, how can I trigger empathy in ways? How do I ask the kinds of questions that can give me the information I need so that we can be doing more than just talking about work and understanding where people are coming from? I mean, I'll give you one sort of small example of it. My biggest observation was working mothers. So the children would come on screen and nobody knew how to deal with it in the beginning. And it was like, oh my God, so cute. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Oh my God, go away, right? I mean, there was all sort of these awkward moments. And then I realized a pattern. That was a child would come on screen and what a mother would do immediately is apologize. And I started thinking about this and just think about it from a child's perspective. So the mother's saying, I'm so sorry, I'm disturbing a meeting. Oh my God, he just came back from school. And then just apologizing profusely. So I started thinking about this and I said, let's think about that child for a minute. What does the child take away? That my mother apologized for me. What does that mean when you apologize for somebody? Are you ashamed? Right? So you start actually thinking about the psychology of that one apology in front of a child. It is really sort of heart-wrenching. So I tell every single mother, I tell every single father, please do not apologize for your children. I stop a meeting when a child comes in, talk to the children. It's 5 seconds, by the way. And inevitably, they're so shy. But I've really been sort of militant in drilling this in. And I do it all the time, too. It's like, oh, my God, I'm so sorry. And then I'm like, no, I'm not sorry. But little things like that are really important for leaders like us, right? To instill and to enact it ourselves so that people will say that, you're serious about it. I mean, that's one example of a new thing I learned and thinking about just the impact on
Gail, what would you say your big
and I totally agree, and it's such a great point around not apologizing for your kids, and you're right, that is a tendency we saw it. For sure, it's about empathy, and I think for us, we've always talked about leading by listening, and we've always tried to live by that, and hopefully do. And listening typically happens in a big way, right? You're listening to what's going on in culture, or you're listening to your surveys that you're doing, as many did throughout the pandemic. But I think it's a little bit about listening small, right? It's about listening to individuals and doing it in an agenda-free way. I think so much of what we experienced in the Zoom world is an agenda. Hey, I am sending you this invite. You will come. Here is what we will talk about. And virtual gave us this opportunity to talk to hundreds of people you wouldn't usually talk to because you're not flying around and you're doing whatever. So people who would never expect you to talk to them and have no agenda. I have no agenda. Just how are you doing? Like, what's happening? What's exciting you? What are you anxious about? That kind of thing. And I mean, I tried, and I know our senior leadership team tried to do that every day, multiple times, just to listen. And importantly, both when you're listening big and listening small, respond and take some action.
Right.
I mean, so it's not simply listening. In this period of time proved that listening is important, but you gotta take the action.
What about operationally? There are aspects of our jobs we don't miss. We don't miss hopping on planes. It's probably not that fruitful to be flying to the south of France every summer. What are operational changes that you think you will want to maybe retain from the pandemic era?
Well, I think again, we talked about this changing workforce in the middle of the pandemic. We hired a C-suite level individual who is the Chief Workforce Innovation Officer, and his job is to really focus on everything we're talking about and push us into a leadership position, and in a leadership position around not only the transformation, but in a transformation that puts inclusion at the heart. If you're working in a dispersed way, that becomes how do you do that, and how do you do that well? So I don't think we will go back to a place where we don't put that at the very top of a company as a critical need state that we have to solve for and continue to evolve. We also hired a Chief Impact Officer, and that was April 1, so kind of the beginning of the pandemic, and brought him in to fuse creativity and strategy, but also a little bit as a result of the need state of our clients, right? I mean, here we are in these very tough circumstances, solving for many, many issues and looking to get impact in very different ways. The other piece, and I think this came out as we talked to client after client, the need to solve at the intersections and therefore put together agile, cross-functional teams to bring that ability to clients again and again and embed those into our more classic client teams. And that's what we're doing. So that's a real evolution for our business. And I think it's hugely important. Deb, what did you do?
The first thing I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to miss heels.
I hear you.
Operationally, there's going to be a big change. It's never going to be a requirement for anybody. There are a lot of things that we did because they were always done. It just sort of felt like the status quo, right? Like 8 people went to a meeting because that's what you did. Mm-hmm. There were things that were just like, this is part of being in this industry. And I think one of the questions that I'm asking myself and I'm asking sort of our team all the time is, as we're thinking about it, is just because we did it doesn't mean we're going to do it again, right? So things like, do 8 people need to travel to a meeting? Let's ask ourselves why. And we're doing a lot more of questioning the little things so that we understand how we operationalize or create new sort of operational policies. The flex workplace is exactly a result of all of that. But it's really funny that Gail talked about a Chief Impact Officer because we're about to announce one.
Oh, is this breaking news?
This is going to be breaking news. I mean, I guess I have to take a step back and say, Andy and I both new to Ogilvy, and one of the first things we obviously did is figure out like what the brand stands for. It's one of the most iconic brands. And going back and having read everything David Ogilvy wrote, there's a lot of sort of core tenets of this brand. And our mission moving forward is to inspire brands and people to impact the world. And it's funny, Gail talked about intersection because that's exactly what we're talking about. Integration is not the way of the future because that's a process. And we do have 5 businesses. And we've restructured the entire P&L system, which has been a big barrier in our industry, right? And this is the beauty of actually having Andy, who comes at it from a different perspective. And we've really rethought our entire P&L structure so that we can have these 5 businesses operated. And we say we're going to innovate, operate at the intersection of people, of capabilities, and geographies, right? And I think it's really important to talk about the people aspect of it too. One of the things I've been telling everybody is when you have a group of people together, just say, can I have somebody else? Think about it. Is a perspective missing in this room? not just gender, not just race, is a perspective missing? Because sometimes that perspective could be a disability. The next question you ask is a capability missing? Actually, if I had a different skill set, would this team be better? And then the third question you say is, am I just thinking about New York, or should I be thinking about somebody from our Minneapolis office? Which is so people, capabilities, geography.
So a couple of things that were raised in the last couple of questions that we were talking about. Obviously, the pandemic also brought to the fore a lot of fissures in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of sex, in terms of disabilities. We talked about some ways that you're addressing them. What are areas you think that still need improvement, and how do you plan to tackle them as a leader?
As it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and issues of race, everything needs improvement, right? And we are working on it. We are making progress, but it is a journey, as everyone says, and that is true. And I don't want to simplify it, but it is about, from an organizational point of view, it's about structure and infrastructure, and it's about culture, right? And if we look at infrastructure, for us, it's taking a look at everything we do, from a hiring point of view, from a recruiting point of view, from an evaluation point of view, from a where you sit in the organization physically, when you're in the organization physically, and deconstructing and reconstructing. And we have a team of people under Brian Offit, and working closely with Brian Offit, who is our Chief Workforce Innovation Officer, doing that. When it gets to culture, it's about training, and I know most organizations have invested in, like ours, in significant amounts of training. For us, it's about cultural competency training at a senior level. It's about unconscious bias training throughout the organization, Black experience training, which has been incredibly meaningful for our teams in doing that. And then it's about the kinds of things we do as an organization, the way we thread our work. Like Devika's organization, we are working with major organizations, industries, governments, etc. So we have this opportunity to make change doing that. We also made a commitment of $1 million in resources to focus around health equity. So we were doing that because, for sure, as we look back on these last 18 months, the fragility and vulnerability in our system really, if one remembers nothing, we'll remember everything from these moments in time. We will remember that, and I believe we can make a difference there by focusing on it. So we are focused as an organization there and making a difference, and focused structurally and culturally. And there's a lot to do. Again, a little progress, but a lot to do.
Devika, so you want to talk about this a little bit more?
Yeah. I think the first thing I just want to echo what Gail said. Everybody's making baby steps and putting one foot forward. And that's the important sort of beginning, and that's important that we keep doing it every day. We have so much work to do. So everything that I'm going to talk about or Gail talked about, in no way do I want anybody out there who's viewing this to think, oh my God, we're doing awesome. No. Second point, I'd say ditto. I don't need to repeat a lot of what Gail said, because we're all doing a lot of similar things. One thing that I'd add that we're doing is, it's interesting as you talk about infrastructure and you talked about culture, the tangible conduit sometimes are very often are the managers, right? And you need to have the right managers, you need to have the right representation there, but what's the right training for those managers? So we're actually taking 250 of our most senior people and creating a mindful manager program. So that we, the top 250 people at Ogilvy, are fully trained and understand how to deal with these issues and be much more mindful. Because it's great, I can put everything in PowerPoint, I can create sort of the cultural tenets and the elements and have, the 5 C's or the 4 W's, and all of us have that. But till the human beings who are leading the teams and the groups are not mindful, don't believe it is something that they need to live, eat, and breathe and be able to portray every day, it's not going to happen. So that's one thing that we are investing in that's going to kick off very soon.
So you also talked about how your own business is changing, right? So you talked about the new P&Ls, and you're also working on, correct me if I'm wrong, but a new form of compensation, which the industry has sort of resisted based on how you perform. Let's reverse that. How are your clients' businesses changing? What are some things that you've had to teach yourselves to adapt to how the clients' businesses evolve?
Look, agility, and I feel like we got a dose of acceleration on how to be much more agile. We've always talked about it in the industry, but the reality is we've never had an event where we've needed to accelerate it to the degree that we've had to do now, right? So, because the whole world was in it together. Every single client, doesn't matter who it is, a government client, national client, a local client, a retail client, a food client, somebody whose business shut down, or somebody who was open. But every business had a systemic shock. And the only way to be the true partners to them was to be agile in a way that we have never seen, whether it comes to agility of thinking, whether it comes to agility of ideation, agility of production. I mean, how do you produce in a world where we couldn't send people out, right? There was a really interesting example of some work that we did in the Middle East where we had to shoot a car commercial, and we actually did it with a toy car. Like, I actually think that's some of the most creative thinking in some ways, right? So that's been super important. Just a sense of partnership, right? We've had to do things and not worry about whether it was in scope, not in scope. Like, all of that sort of went out the window when you think about just our own business. Mm-hmm. And we talk about partnership very often, and we're asking clients to be true partners to us. And this was a moment that tested our partnership to them as well, right? Because we are in the service business. So that sense was hugely important to us. I mean,
and listen, we are in violent agreement. as you know, it's interesting on the agility piece. We do client surveys, again, as many organizations we do when we do them annually. And for as long as I can remember, the top two things clients look for are strategy and creative. Like, every year it shifts a little, strategy and creative or strategy. This year it was agility. I mean, for all the reasons that Devika says. And that's for sure what we've been doing. And client relationships, again, to the point you made, a little bit because of empathy and this shared experience, I think have never been stronger. The piece I think that's a little bit different from a Weber-Shandwick point of view, because, if asked who Weber-Shandwick is, we will say we are born in PR and built to solve our clients' most complex problems. And that is true, and that's how we built the organization. And for us, the notion of intersectionality came to play because you look at what happened in these last 18 months, and it was a collision of crises, frankly. It was a public health crisis and an economic crisis and a crisis around racial injustice and an information crisis and a mental health crisis and all of those crises. So for us, it was building those agile teams that could solve at the epicenter of those crises. And we have been counseling on issues of diversity and issues of communication around vaccination and issues early on, issues of communication around COVID. And not only at the comms level, also at the supply chain level, and helping clients figure those things out. So really complicated problems that kind of worked at the nexus of policy and technology and media and culture. And I don't think we'll go back. I mean, that's where clients' need state have changed. They've become more complex. They've become more intersectional and intertwined. And we've got to, I think all of us as an industry, as a marketing services industry, have to be able to comport ourselves to address those issues.
Yeah, I think you're 1,000% right, Gail. Nobody comes to us. A client's not coming to us anymore and saying, here's my advertising problem, here's my PR problem, here's my digital experience problem.
They're coming to you and saying, this is my problem.
Mm-hmm. And their problems are at the intersection of many different aspects of their own business, right? Because all the forces are colliding. And clients have the same issues we have. They had social justice issues, and how do they go to market with their brands or their services or their products? And do they do something or do they not do something? One of the things I think it's interesting is, I think Gail comes from a world where crisis management is in her bloodstream. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I just learned crisis management, or had like this PhD in crisis management in the last year, which has been a really, really sort of interesting experience.
We are all crisis managers.
That's that's what you do,
right? I think that's a fabulous point to end on. So if I were to summarize everything that we've discussed today, there's a collision of forces. There's no one way to do anything or business anymore. It's all about intersectionality. You've learned a lot of agility moving forward, and the future workforce is not just going to be one that is flexible. It's also going to be one that takes into account multiple experiences, whether it comes to race or sex or disability. Thank you so much for joining me, Devika and Gail, and thank you so much for this amazing discussion that we had.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you so much, Gail and Devika. This event was inspired by Insider's recent What's Next feature article, where we asked dozens of CEOs about their plans for returning to the office. You can find a link to the article in the resource list below. What we found in our reporting was that many CEOs believe the office is a vital part of driving culture. For our next session, Insider's senior editor, Chris Weller, welcomes leaders from PwC and Richardson Partners to discuss mentorship and reskilling for building a high-performing workforce. Take it away, Chris.
truth is, all of us need a little help from time to time. But what's the business case for actively coaching, mentoring, and upskilling a whole workforce? We've actually known the answer for a while. 15 years ago, the research firm Gartner found people were promoted up to 6 times more often when they enrolled in a mentorship program. Retention rates also shot up among those in the program. So the question today isn't, do mentorship and upskilling work? It's, how do we create the right conditions to get the best results possible? To help explore that question, I'm joined today by 2 esteemed guests. Annette Richardson, founder and managing partner of Richardson Partners, LLC, and Sunit Dua, Chief Product Officer at PwC. Thank you both for joining us.
Hello, Chris. Thank you for having us.
So, Annette, I'd love to start with you. Upskilling and mentorship all begins with the right mindset. We can't get people to do different things or develop new habits unless they're approaching the work with a different attitude, a different position mentally. Can you talk to me a little bit around the importance of mindset and what are the critical mindsets people today need to bring to their jobs?
Yeah, so I'm just going to take a little bit of a macro view to the mindset. It's really an investment in human capital that organization at a sort of, global, international, local, and national level has to take. And really investing in people is really key to, future market. I talk often about investing beyond nutrition and health and really investing in quality education, jobs, and skills to end, a lot of the global issues that we are faced today. There is mounting evidence that unless, organizations strengthen their human capitals, countries will never be able to achieve sustained inclusive economies and growth. So we have to prepare the workforce for, highly skilled jobs of the future, and we have to be competitive in the global economy. So that's really the cost of inaction around upskilling and often reskilling is going up. And we saw with COVID-19 that we could potentially lose a decade of human capital gains, and leaving a generation behind. So this concept of, leaving no one behind is really important.
And Sunit, what comes up for you there? I know you're big in the digital space and helping people become digital citizens or natives and more upskilled there. Talk to me a little bit around the mindsets that you feel are as critical.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. And I'll leave what Annette just said about leaving no one behind. We just did a hopes and fears survey in the firm at PwC. About 32,000 employees were interviewed. 77% said they want new skills. They need new skills. And 60% are worried about the digital automations that are coming out there. So it's the mindset has to be there from a CEO perspective, but the mindset really needs to be there from an organization wide. And leaving no one behind, I think that's what we did with our transformation. And it's really important because you have to make sure you provide all the digital channels for the folks to really not just acknowledge themselves, but truly upskill themselves, which is really applied learning. And one of the things the CEOs are really concerned about is they're concerned about key skills of their individuals. But 1 out of 5 CEOs in our survey showed that they haven't done anything about it. And Chris, as you started, the why is pretty easy. It's the how. And we're trying to help companies work through the how. The how is not that hard. And you have to get started because it's our fiduciary responsibility to take care of our people.
77% is quite staggering. It also shows that people are eager. They want to learn. They know that the game has changed and they need the help, as you said, the how. So I'm going to get to the how in a second, but let's talk a little bit about the what, shall we say. So when we talk about the skills that are important, what are those skills? Sunit, I'll keep it with you for now. What do people need to know right now? What is it that they need to keep their eye on and channel that energy into?
Yeah, so Chris, I think there's about 8 to 10 digital disruptive technologies out there that are going to create all these new skills. So if you put digital behind any job right now, the job and the role has changed. A controller yesterday, and you put digital controller tomorrow, a digital controller in a finance organization is going to be doing data visualization. It's going to be doing data reconciliation, has to become a data steward, as well as going to might apply some workflows or RPAs into their processes from order to cash or quote to cash. That's the different skills that we need our enterprises to embrace. Now, when it comes to AI, ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, wrangling large ton of data, that is a skill set that I think everyone's going to need to have. Data scientist is going to be a household name in every organization, and that's really important.
And Annette, I'll pose this to you. When we talk about upskilling as a kind of a way into performance and boosting performance organization-wide, what's that link? Why does helping one individual multiplied out increase performance? What's kind of that tissue, that connective tissue?
Yeah, no, I think that, and your previous panel, I think, touched on that quite a bit, right? This notion of collaboration, this notion of global markets. I mean, you can no longer operate on your own and in a box. And I think you have to be top performing in a global economy. People have to feel connected. There's got to be disruption at sort of any level, including human experiences. That's really, really important. So this, your previous guest talked about, the nexus of team and collaboration, and it's, I think, at the core of top performance and upskilling. We are talking politically and economically about competition from China and other, markets, even frontier markets, and I think this is paramount to really keep in mind. PwC and Sunit's team has developed an extraordinary solution to, that can really sort of change the way people become much more performant around the world.
And Chris,
yeah, go ahead.
You don't mind me asking, let me just add one more thing. I think as a key data point to your question, about 75 million roles or jobs are going away in the next 2 to 3 years. But about 133 million new roles and jobs are new that are coming. What we're trying to explain to corporate America or the global CEOs is, one, you have to embrace that. Two, you have to teach these new skills that we just talked about, and your employees have to become what we call lifelong learners. Once they start becoming that, and as you started, Chris, they will graduate to me a digital citizen. That's where we then transact with automations and bots, right, on a day-to-day basis.
I believe Annette brought this up, at least indirectly, and I want to probe a little deeper. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think the equity piece is often a little tougher for people to intuit. But it's a really crucial point, and I want to spend a little time talking about it, because it really is, when we talk about global learning and upskilling, that's the piece that we're talking about when we talk about equity. People need to feel like they're a part of it, they're along for the ride. So I'll pose this to Sunit. I'll pose this to you first. How do we help everybody, especially in post-COVID when we're talking about a hybrid workforce, as we saw in the last session? How do we help people who are at home, in the office, some mixture of both, feel like they're part of the same goal as their colleagues who are working in some sort of different arrangement?
Yeah, Chris, I actually think the pandemic has truly helped and accelerated at scale this notion of lifelong learning and the digital learning. In the pre-pandemic, I think, or most folks had a curriculum, or they went to some different schooling, or they had a benefit around that, and the currency of time wasn't there. post-pandemic, everyone's recognized that, okay, I can do a lot of things as well as put time aside for myself and my family. And that time that they put aside is to take care of themselves from a mental capacity perspective and give them the skills they need. And the beauty of what Annette mentioned is what we have built is around how do you give individual curated learning of really good content so they can apply it to themselves, right? Which is either micro learning or applied learning around capstones and events like that. To me, that's what the pandemic has really helped us with. And it's also disrupted a bit of the schools and colleges that have been doing the same thing for 170 years, has made them change a bit, which now as the systematic changes are happening, folks will embrace more of this, what I would call micro learning and taking care of their mental self in this next fourth industrial revolution.
Annette, I'd love
I
to hear
just
your
wanted
thoughts.
to add, yeah, no, I just wanted to add something to that. I think there's also, and obviously this pandemic is not over, so we'll see what happens over the course of the next 5 years that it evolves. And I think what Sunit is also touching on is the importance. I think organizations have realized that they perhaps didn't have the workforce that they needed to have in a time of crisis, right? And I think that is fundamental to the shift that is needed, or the mindset that is needed, so that CEOs can understand that, in the context of a hybrid workforce, or in a context of a remote working workforce, then those talents have to be performing at the highest level. And I think that is very unique. It's a unique opportunity to take advantage of. I believe that there will be other pandemics. I think this is not the first one, and it's obviously not the last one. And I think rethinking how can organization be ready for the next one is really important.
You teed up my next question perfectly in that. So how do we do that? We're now at the how, right? It's where the rubber meets the road. So Annette, I'll keep with you for a second. What are the first steps? But if you want to take it and blow up the answer, give us the master plan, please. I'm sure we would all like to hear it.
Well, I think you have to follow Sunit's footstep. I think he's found, I'm very sort of solution driven. So we're looking, I understand what the issues are, and we're looking for partners and sort of that have the solution. I think it's an evolving space, which is going to be fascinating over the next probably 5 to 10 years. I agree that it's a continuum. I think that it's lifelong learning. But I think if we can begin sort of moving populations of workers, and I'm thinking about entrepreneurs in emerging markets as well, into a place where they will become, where we will actually mitigate that sort of digital divide and be able to actually provide to them their sort of greatest potential to be more productive citizen. I think that's the key. So these are technologies that are to watch and to integrate into any organization now, so that you're sort of ready for the future and not waiting for the next pandemic to happen and then be in the same sort of predicament again.
Yeah. So
Sneak
Chris,
any thoughts?
no. So great question, and Annette, thanks for the tee up. I will tell you, Chris, let's dispel the myth of it's not hard to start. I think that's the hardest piece, that who do I start with and when do I start? You don't have to start with everybody, and you should start now. I mean, that's the easy part. The first step is truly planning. You have to baseline your organization. You have to know what you have. What you can't do is you can't fire everyone and hire a whole new staff around automation and all these new skill sets. You do have to reskill the current skill sets you have because they have great industry knowledge and process knowledge of your organization. So that baseline is equally as important. But once the baseline is done, then you have to create a gamified view or an approach how to take that company or the organization or the function to that digital journey. And if you set those end goals with the ROI behind it, and the ROI doesn't have to be heads out. The ROI is revenue per productivity. It could be other features, even culture, or the culture index or attrition should be part of this as well. Once that's defined, then you got to create what I call the digital channels. And that's why we built our platform ProEdge, individualized learning channels. You do have to learn, right? You have to teach the new skills. They're not magically going to come. And once you teach them, you have to give time to the individual so they can learn. You can't ask them to do a 9 to 12-hour day and then do 2 hours of learning at night. That's not learning. So what we built in the firm was we call them infinite learning days. We give 3 days additional off to our staff so they can start taking time to learn the channels that we've given them, so they can bring that back to the firm. So those are some of the couple steps, Chris, that we took. We made a lot of mistakes, but we saw a huge success where we have over 270,000 people being upskilled in our firm right now.
We actually got a viewer question that I think ties nicely to this. This person says they're looking to build a team that'll produce AR and VR solutions, but it's really hard, they say, to find people who are skilled in that area. So their question is, do they mentor their existing people, or do they go looking for expensive talent?
Yeah, I think the answer is in the hybrid. I think one you have to do is that baseline of what is the skill of the AR VR that they actually need from the organization, and what are the outcomes that they're looking for. If they can figure out the outcomes that they're looking for, then match it to the skills, and then whatever the gap is, there's enough content out there that can close that gap. And if that gap's not solved by the individual folks, then I would then go hire those individuals. Now, think about hiring people in your organization. People who want to come to your organization are excited. So you have to excite them on why should they come there, and you're going to take them on a journey.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to pose a question around learning, which is, should it be mandatory? Should it be optional? What are the ways that you get people's buy-in so that they want to do it, but they also do it? You know, they have to want to do it, and they have to do it, even if they don't, perhaps. So, Annette, I'll kick that to you.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I'm not a technologist, obviously, but I think that I think people have an appetite to learn. I do think that the way they learn and what they learn, I think, will depend on the quality of the content and the distribution of the content. I think that I don't think that learning is an issue. I think the tools to learn, I think, will become more and more, you know, more and more important in the future.
And then I agree in that, and I would say, Chris, I'm going to use this term, and so I'm going to say learning and in education tech right now, content is like a pig's breakfast. It is all over the place. It's not really geared to the individual on their job of applied learning. And I think one of the things that we're trying to change as a firm, which we realize from our own mistakes, is you have to capture the heart and then the mind to make them to make the individual learn. And you have to create the time as well. But it has to tie to the job that they're doing or the job that they're going to be doing. And if you just teach them code and they don't apply that code like Python, then they're not going to enjoy that learning, right? It's just going to go on the shelf. So we're trying to make it sticky from that perspective. And I think that's where the digital divide is so wide. And to close that divide, you got to put it into applied learning.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from the both of you is it has to feel compelling. The stuff has to be great. It has to feel relevant. But it also has to be delivered through the right terms. People still might feel like it's separate from their actual work. It has to feel integrated, shall we say. And I think you've given us a lot both to think about, and all this complexity. One thing is certain, this moment won't last forever. And so if leaders want to make big changes, whether it's around human skills or closing the digital skills gap, now's their time. So Thank you, Annette and Sunit,
That's
and
great.
to you for watching. Back to you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you so much, Annette and Sunit. Please remember to take our survey at any time during this event. You just click the icon at the bottom of the page. And now we have another great session. Rebecca Knight, Insider's senior correspondent, and her guest will discuss how diversity and innovation define the future of work. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Julia. I'm joined by Jessie Wooley Wilson. She is the CEO of Bellevue, Washington-based Dreambox, the learning technology company that sells direct to customers, schools, and school districts. At the height of the pandemic, Wooley Wilson took the unusual step of making the Dreambox digital platform free to help families, students, and teachers. She's going to tell us more about that decision in just a little bit. She'll also tell us why she believes that diversity and inclusion in the workforce hold the key to product innovation, and what the pandemic taught her about the power of empathic leadership. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jessie.
It's my pleasure to be here, Rebecca.
So I want to begin by talking a little bit about Dreambox itself. Dreambox Learning offers K-8 digital math programs in all 50 states, as well as Canada and Mexico. Tell our viewers a little bit more about Dreambox's products and services, as well as how the pandemic changed your business model.
You know, Dreambox was developed to try to build confidence and competence in young learners. We wanted to give them a foundational understanding of mathematics so that they could continue to learn and actually love learning while they learn. So it's really based on three things. We want it to be very engaging. We want it to be very personalized, to meet every child where they are. And we want it to be effective. We don't want moms or teachers to wonder if it's worthwhile putting their kid on Dreambox.
It really is. Now, talk a little bit about the decision to make the platform free.
So the pandemic just introduced uncertainty to everybody. And we got together with the executive team and we said, if we could have educators and teachers have one thing that they didn't have to worry about, just one thing, it might help. And so what we could do is mathematics. So that's what we wanted to focus on. So we opened up the platform and we said through the end of the school year, anybody can get on the platform. We really didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if people were going to have the capacity to do it or the interest. We didn't know if people really knew about Dreambox. We just knew that our values were, we wanted to prepare every child for a successful future. And with schools closed, we didn't know if they were going to have access to teachers or programs. And we said, we can make it free. So we're going to open it up and see what happens. It took a little doing, convincing with the board, but I think when you rely on your values in times of uncertainty, I think that's the best thing that you can do. You can wake up every day and know that you did the best that you could do.
And you gave, as you said, parents, teachers, students, one less thing to worry about at a time of great uncertainty. So speaking about these COVID-induced school closures, they have had a devastating effect on kids and they've thrown education into crisis mode. We still don't quite know the extent of the learning gaps. And yet at the same time, this forced experiment in online learning revealed a lot of new ways for teachers to teach and for kids to learn. And you have said that this is a testament to the power and progress of adaptivity. What do you mean by that? Can you expand a little bit on that?
So our platform, it's called the Intelligent Adaptive Learning Platform. It collects over 50,000 data points per student per hour. And essentially, it adapts to every child based on the confidence that they demonstrate on the platform as they are solving problems. Are they doing it quickly? Are they doing it with a lot of mistakes? We capture all this information to make sure we meet every child where they are so that every lesson is neither too easy or too difficult. We don't want them bored. We don't want them frustrated. And so we sat around the leadership team and we said, we're asking kids and teachers to adapt every day with our Intelligent Adaptive Platform. What are we doing to adapt? There's a lesson in this for everyone. And that is in unfamiliar environments with unexpected stimuli, we have to figure out how to harness collective wisdom and respond to the environment as it changes rapidly. We think the future is going to be based on companies and people, talent, who embrace adaptivity, an ethos of adaptivity. And we believe that these experiences will lead to different opportunities.
I need to ask, were you a math whiz as a kid?
I wasn't a math whiz. I struggled with it like most people. In fact, one of the things we do when we go to schools is we ask school leaders, big school leaders with big titles, tell us a math story. And 9 times out of 10, it's a painful one about how they felt inadequate, about how they never mastered something, about how they went into teaching because they didn't think they had to be good at math. And what we believe at Dreambox is that everybody is inherently a mathematician. And if we had learning experiences that would meet everybody where they were, that would reward exploration and discovery instead of punishing it, then we would cultivate that natural mathematician, and it would manifest in everybody. The poor, the affluent, the minority, the majority, everyone is inherently a mathematician.
Cultivating everyone's inner mathematician. I love it. Jessie, you talked a little bit about these significant equity gaps in education, and the pandemic, as we know, has exacerbated them. How is Dreambox positioning itself as part of the solution?
So this gets back to our philosophy about diversity. In this environment, a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do I manage diversity? We were all impacted by the murder of George Floyd in one way or another. And a lot of people walked away from that saying, what more can I do? What can I do differently? And we believe that instead of focusing on how to manage diversity, we need to pivot to focus on how to leverage diversity. And if we leverage diversity, it means that we value it. And what gets measured actually gets valued. So if we go with that kind of frame of mind, then we can say, diversity is something that can make everybody more successful. So we believe at Dreambox that diversity is required in order to build empathetic and relevant learning experiences. And in order for us to be successful commercially, we have to have products that are relevant to people's lives, that speak to them, and that are empathetic to them as human beings. And it's kind of easy to adopt that. If you really believe that diversity is something to be leveraged, then it doesn't feel like just another project or another obligation. It feels like an opportunity. And we believe that is what fuels innovation. When you have a lot of diverse points of view around the table and people say, I never thought of it that way. I never considered the impact of that. I'm so glad you shared a story about your childhood. That really makes me understand what our kids might be experiencing. Thank you. That goes into the soup of innovation. That goes into the UI, UX. That goes into the lesson progression. That goes into everything. And we feel that goes into our success. It's in the soup of success, diversity.
So you mentioned the killing of George Floyd. These past 15 months have had so many overlapping crises: the coronavirus, economic collapse and uncertainty, a reckoning with racism and injustice, and a divisive election. You were talking about the power of empathy. Can you talk a little bit about how you, as a leader, showed your own vulnerability during this crisis to your employees and to your customers, and talk about the difference that it made?
I have to tell you, I learned a lot of things in business school, but I didn't learn how to lead through a pandemic. And I decided that I was going to recognize that the people we hired at Dreambox Learning were really smart. They were very authentic. So there was no point in telling them anything that wasn't authentic. So I got in front of them and I said, look, I don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. I don't know what's going to happen to our company. All I know is that there are things we can control and influence and things that we can't control and influence. And I want everyone to join me in focusing on the things we can control and influence. We didn't know if we were ever going to be able to sell anything because schools were closed. Our buyers weren't there anymore. We didn't know if they were going to be even available on a phone, let alone a Zoom. So we decided we were going to be guided by 3 principles. We were going to first take care of each other. We wanted people to feel safe and secure. Secondly, we were going to take care of our customers. There's no way you can take care of your customer if you're worried about yourself. So first take care of each other, and then we can bring our best self to our customers. Then we were going to ask our customers, what can we do now for you that's different because the pandemic is here? What do you need? And that's a scary thing, because what if they ask you for something you can't provide? And I said, that's true. That might happen. but they're going to know we care about them, and they're going to know we reached out. And we're going to be honest with them about what we can do and what we can't do. The third thing is that if we could take care of each other and then take care of our customers, by definition, we were going to be taking care of the company. And it was as simple as that. I said, if everything that you do every day doesn't fit in one of those buckets, then you have permission not to do it. And everybody got focused, everybody took care of each other, and empathy became the modus operandi for ourselves, for our customers, and for our communities, really. So the lesson for me was, it's okay to be vulnerable. In times of crisis, your team cares about what you think about, they care about what worries you, and it validates what they're feeling. So vulnerability is something you don't learn in business school as a leader. It's a power lane for leadership, because if people believe that you're authentic and they can see your humanity, then they're going to show up in a different way. I really believe that.
It's interesting. I mean, I wonder if this will change MBA programs. You've said this twice now, that you didn't learn this in business school, and yet it has been a superpower in terms of managing through crisis. Vulnerability 101.
I think MBA programs are going to have to adapt as well. I think we're at an inflection point. And there was a time when employers had all the leverage. You're reading reports now that our unemployment rate is really low. And people are saying, maybe I'm not going to come back to work. I think the pendulum is swinging, and the leverage is swinging more in the employee camp. So we're going to have to figure out a way to meet every employee where they are. We're going to have to figure out a way to make sure our organizations are places where people feel they can grow and develop. We're going to have to make sure that our organizations reflect the communities that people want to be a part of, getting back to diversity. And we're going to have to make sure that organizations are overt and explicit about what they value. Because employees now, from the first day of the interview to the first day of onboarding to their first anniversary and beyond, are unapologetic and very courageous and very intentional about what they want and what they need in their professional environment. And now that a lot of people are going to be working from home more, we'll return to the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week. It's going to be hard to maintain culture. You're going to have to do more things to make sure that people lean into what you're trying to do. So I feel like the MBA programs of the future are going to have to teach leaders how to create positive gravity so that the best talent and the best hearts choose them.
Talking a little bit more about bringing your authentic self to work. In an earlier interview you did with the New York Times, you talked about how in your career, when you were starting out as a woman of color in financial services, the expectations for excellence were either really high or really low. It's not like you could just be you said. Can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy and how it's shaped you as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's not only high and low, or low. I would say it's high and low. So I learned early on that sometimes society puts masks on people. They put masks on women. They're indecisive. They're too emotional. They put masks on people of color. They're not prepared. They're not hardworking, or even negative things. And so you have to decide early on that you have to understand the masks that society wants to impose on you, but that doesn't mean you have to accept them or embrace them. So it was hard. 20, 30 years ago, diversified financial services didn't have many women, let alone people of color. And so you're an icebreaker. And when you're an icebreaker, you're in the front and you get the wins and you get the harsh treatment because you're trying to create a pathway for people that come after you. But as long as it doesn't impact your inner core, as long as you're driven by your values, as long as you're driven by a belief that there's some way you can make the world better, then I think you can find your pathway. And for me, that was in education and education technology. So I was volunteering while I was on Wall Street. I was volunteering in Harlem and I was tutoring kids. And I saw this innovation and I saw how industrious they were. And I saw what they were able to achieve through scarcity that frankly I'd never experienced myself. And I said, if this isn't intelligence, I don't know what is. These were kids who were getting an MBA of life. They knew risk management, they knew marketing, they knew production and operations, they knew all of these things, and they were applying it to things that were non-traditional, but they were brilliant. I said, talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. I decided I was going to take my talents and my capabilities and to try to bridge the gap between talent and opportunity, and that was through education. It's not enough. George Floyd taught us that education in and of itself is not enough, but it's an essential ingredient to access to the American dream.
Talk a little bit. I mean, this series is about innovation and diversity. And you talked a little bit about the beginning of this conversation about how having a diverse workforce, it's in your DNA and it goes into the products. How do you see it as driving innovation and driving creativity in Dreambox's products and services?
In the wake of the Floyd murder, I got together the team and we read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham City jail. And we talked about it. And we talked about how it impacted us. And we talked about its relevance to our mission to radically change the way the world learns. And we talked about it in relation to our vision that every child deserves a personalized, effective, and engaging learning experience, regardless of what zip code they're from. And that gave us an opportunity to revalidate our values. And while culture and context changes, values do not. We really believe that that is something that instills freedom to explore things that you otherwise might explore. So an example of that, I'll give you two examples. One, our head of technology asked everybody on the team to go back and take a look at every lesson to make sure there wasn't implicit bias or things that we didn't intend that might be misinterpreted by children of color in particular. And they went back and they reviewed all of the lessons. They didn't find anything, thankfully, but I didn't ask for that to be done, but they did it. And they went and they asked our customers, and our customers asked us to expand the avatars that we have that kids can select in the program. So now we have avatars. We have always had avatars that had different skin hues, but we were told by customers that we needed more darker tones. So we've done that. That's an example. Another example is that our chief learning officer, who happens to be a white male from Missouri, decided to embark on a monthly meeting, company-wide. It's the most well-attended meeting at Dreambox Learning. And we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. We talk about hard topics like racial bias or white privilege. We talk about things that happen in the current news cycle about, racist activities toward Asian Americans, for example. And all of those are dealt with in a very open and authentic way. And people share wrenching stories about what happens in their real lives. And I have to tell you, I am 1000% sure that we are cultivating a more empathetic organization. And that empathy is showing up in our innovation and our creativity and our UX, UI design, in how we deal and partner with each other and our customers. And so, again, diversity is something to be leveraged, not to be managed. It's not just about recruiting. It's about how you show up every day and how comfortable you are showing up with your full self.
And comfortable tackling hard topics too. I mean, some companies are really going the opposite way and saying, we don't want to talk about politics or anything too hard. We only want to focus on the work. But what you're saying is that talking about these hard topics has made everyone at Dreambox more empathetic and more able to be creative and innovative in their work life too.
It's absolutely the case. I can't tell you how many customers have told us, we remember that you were there for us in our time of need. And I had one superintendent say to me, I was looking for the press release about all the free stuff that you were doing for schools, and I couldn't find it. And I asked my staff to look for the press release, and they couldn't find it. We're going to remember that you did it because you thought it was right.
Doing the right thing, it pays off. Let's talk about women who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. They bore the brunt of the burden at home, and many left the workforce. What are you doing to get them back in? And talk a little bit about what's at stake here if corporate America doesn't make the workforce more amenable to women and to mothers.
So this is something that keeps me up at night. When I think about the roles that women, especially women with children, have had to play over the last 18 months. They're chief professional. They're the chief learning officer in the home. They're the chief caregiver of aging parents who are isolated because of the pandemic. Women are weary. Women are tired. And we need women in the workforce. And a lot of women are finding it hard to even contemplate coming back to the workforce because they haven't had enough relief. So there are macro things that we have to do and micro things. We have to fix the child support challenge for women. We just have to do that, especially for women who are in that crunch period where they're taking care of elderly parents as well as young children. And that's not something individual companies can remedy, but there has to be a higher level of coordination between federal, state, and local entities to make sure that there are more services for women. That's the first thing. The second thing is women interrupted their career progression when they had to step off and be the primary caregiver for 18 months. Should they be punished when they return? I would say no. And I think one thing companies can do is try to figure out a way when they re-onboard women after this hiatus to make sure that they can be reassured that their career progression has not been stymied during their absence. They're as brilliant as they were before. Even if they're rusty, they're as brilliant as they were before, and they can add value in a big way. And my experience with women is when you make a small move to them, an empathetic move to them to recognize what weight they are carrying, it translates into deeper loyalty and appreciation. And then the last thing is the easiest thing that we can do. We can make sure that we can deliver flexibility. So we just built out a new office space in downtown Bellevue, and we were pretty flexible before, but we're going to be even more flexible and accommodating to women. So if there are women who would like to continue to work primarily from home, we're going to accommodate that. If there are women, because their home situation is actually not conducive to work, they can spend more time in the workforce. So it's about the theme that we started this conversation with. It's about being adaptive. It's about being intelligently adaptive. It's about metabolizing new data, new stimuli from the environment, and meeting people where they are, just like we do with the platform and every individual learner.
What is the future of work looking like at Dreambox? You mentioned that you have a new office in downtown Bellevue. You also had said that you think that people will be in 2 to 3 days a week. How do you make sure that you maintain the Dreambox culture at a time where you're not all together all the time? What are you thinking about that?
So I don't have the answer to this, but this is something I'm thinking a lot about. I think one of the reasons we had such a productive time during COVID was because we leveraged the culture that we have. But I feel like we were taking coins out of our culture bank over the past 18 months. And the piggy bank doesn't have as much coin in it as it used to. We're going to have to figure out a way to replenish our culture piggy bank to make sure that it's as vibrant and as strong and as resilient as it was before the pandemic. And what we're probably going to do is we're going to ask our employees what they think we should do. We're going to remind them what their values are, what our shared values are, and we're going to ask what are things we can do to reinforce the Dreambox culture that brought you here and that keeps you here when we're not the highest paying employer here, clearly, with Amazon and Microsoft. And
you've got some competition, yes.
Right? Got some competition. And so we have people here who have chosen to bring their talent and their heart for years. I think that we have wisdom right in front of us. All we have to do is tap it.
So, Jessie, prognosticating is hard, but I want you to look into your crystal ball a little bit here. It seems safe to say that work is never going to be the same. Education is never going to be the same. What are you thinking about in terms of what comes next over the next 6 months, a year, 5 years? What's on your mind?
So I think that we have made a pivot in education. Before the pandemic, I would say that blended learning solutions were a nice to have add-on. And a lot of schools and school districts used it to give students an edge. I think after the pandemic, it moved from a nice to have to a must have. And teachers and students and parents all got more proximate to what was happening and maybe what wasn't happening in the typical classroom in the United States. And so we have new ways to engage. So I believe the future is going to have a different relationship between the home-based learning guardian and the school-based learning guardian. Moms and dads and grandparents and other home-based learning guardians got up close and personal, looking over the shoulders of their kids at the dining room table. And some of them were shocked and some of them were really pleased. But all of them are going to have different kinds of conversations with teachers, even when school reopens. I don't think parents are going to retreat from what they've learned. I think they're going to lean into it and they're going to have a different relationship with the school-based learning guardian. So for example, there's a lot more intuitive data available about what's happening with your child socially, emotionally, academically, etc. And all this information is available to both home-based learning guardians and school-based learning guardians. We're going to start talking about that so that we can do more for kids, so that we can lock arms and wrap both sets of arms around every learner so that they get what they need to thrive and drive innovation in the world that they're going to inherit. So I think that's an example. We're going to move from a nice to have to a must have. The relationship between home-based learning guardians and school-based learning guardians is permanently changed. There's a higher degree of comfort and expectation on the parts of educators, teachers, about what's possible with nuanced, personalized data. Maybe it was always there for them, but they didn't tap. They were forced to tap it when schools closed, and now they're going to embrace it.
And it really puts children at the center of this too.
Think about the kindergartner now. We're saying you're going to have to figure out climate change. You're going to have to figure out racial justice. You're going to have to figure out globalized economies. We have to help them learn how to learn. We have no idea what jobs, let alone what industries, are going to be available to them when they're collegians or when they're ready to enter their workforce. And so what we have to do is not think so much about reading or math or social studies, although everybody should have a much more comprehensive understanding of American history. But we have to help each kid learn how to learn so that they can remake their skill sets over and over again based on the stimuli, crises, challenges, opportunities that you and I, Rebecca, can't even imagine. They have to be ready for the future that's uncertain. And I believe that blended learning and adaptive learning environments are one of the best remedies for encouraging curiosity and discovery and making sure that kids have a sense of agency in their own evolution as learners, as citizens, as human beings.
Jessie, after a year unlike any other, we know that education and our work and our lives are forever changed. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us how the pandemic had an impact on your thinking, your approach, and your leadership. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca. I enjoyed it.
And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in too. Until next time, back to you, Julia.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, Jessie, for that thoughtful and important conversation around education, DEI, leadership, and vulnerability. Please keep sharing, and remember the hashtag is Insider Events. For our final session today, we will discuss how business growth and sustainability are closely linked to talent. Karen Ho is Insider's senior reporter on sustainability. Now over to Karen in our studio.
Thanks, Julia. The pandemic has changed many things about how businesses operate. This includes their strategies on sustainability. Accelerating the green transformation doesn't mean sacrifices for driving growth. Being more efficient can help reduce waste and improve the world. Companies today are actively transforming their operations to be more sustainable, and they're going beyond simple changes in manufacturing and design. These corporate decision makers are playing a key role in a much larger transformation around how people live and work. I'd like to introduce you to Ari Trastal, the CEO of Crisp, a company reducing food waste through smart data, and Mark Frohnmeyer, founder and president of Arcimoto, a small footprint electric vehicle company. Both of you are entrepreneurs of multiple companies. When was the moment that inspired your current sustainable business? All right, let's start with you.
Oh, thank you, Karen. An honor to be on the panel to discuss this topic. In 2016, I was very fortunate to sell my last technology company called Tapad. I was tired and beaten up as an entrepreneur after 20 years of constantly running out of money and losing that important client, or we can't get the technology to work. And when that sale actually happened, or the business happened on my business, I figured, what can I do as a birthday gift to my family? So we took the entire family and we traveled around the world for 14 months, a girl 4 and a boy 8. So which was an amazing thing for us as a family, but we also, during that time, saw all of these paradoxes in the world. So we were in India 1 week, and we saw kids my age, kids that are the same age as my kids, with a lot of food insecurities. And the week after, we were in New Zealand, and we saw apples rotting in the field. And I came to understand after that a third of all of the food that is produced in the world is actually lost before it reaches a consumer. As consumers, we always think about that we shouldn't waste food, but a lot of this food is actually disappearing in the supply chain, 1/3 of all the food that's produced. So that was the inspiration to kind of see what can we do with technology, what can we do with data to help fix this large imbalance. It is a huge paradox that we have 1 billion people that live with food insecurities, and at the same time, we have 1/3 of all the food going to waste. So we think about this as a triple bottom line. We think about it as we want to design something that's good for the world, number one. Number two, good for our customers. And number three, good for us in that order. We call it the triple bottom line. So we're a data platform that allows data to flow much easier so that everybody can plan and be better and not lose this important food that we need.
Mark, it sounds like that company actually has a lot in common with you and your use of technology and focus on efficiency. Can you tell us more about your company?
Yeah, well, it sounds like Ari has definitely have familiarity with the struggles of bringing something, through the development process, and actually that entrepreneurial journey is its own story. But I actually came at Arcimoto originally. I sold a company in 2007 doing video games, and went looking for a sustainable way of getting around town. There's this huge disconnect between the vehicles we drive and how we actually use them. So, cars are 4,000-pound machines that can carry 5 to 7 people, but we typically drive them alone or with just one other person with a relatively small amount of stuff, a relatively short distance. And so I actually went to the market looking for something to buy that would solve that problem in a much more sustainable way, that would be all electric, emission-free, affordable, high quality. And I was sort of shocked in 2007 that I couldn't find anything, not locally, not in the world, that really hit the sweet spot for daily transport. And that was kind of the genesis point for Arcimoto. Was I actually saw a 3-wheeled kit vehicle in a parade, and it was that light bulb moment that illuminated the giant gap between the bike and the car. And so that was 2007. Spent the first 7 years just refining the basic idea of a new vehicle platform, focused around the last mile, or really like the last 10 miles type trips that we take. And we went into production in 2019. Of course, this last year, going through the very early phases of production of an electric vehicle in the middle of a global pandemic has been its own real treat. But we're deeply committed to really right-sizing the footprint of transportation, rethinking the 50% of our cities that we pave over for moving and parking cars. And ultimately, we see what we're building really is at the confluence of autonomy, lightweight electric platforms, shared mobility. And that's a really key piece of driving a solution to carbon emissions. The transportation sector is a huge emitter of carbon. And we think we can make a big dent and make cities not suck anymore at the same time.
That's a great intro to my next question, which is, the food industry as well as the transportation industry saw huge shifts as a result of the pandemic. And in addition to that, there were concerns in regards to long-term effects on supply chain and operations. I'm really curious about how the pandemic affected both of your companies in operations specifically. And Ari, let's start with you, especially with your partnerships with different companies and how they were managing their food waste around the world.
Yeah, it was incredibly interesting part of our journey as a company. You have food is the largest industry in the world, and it's about a $10 trillion industry. There are probably more than 100 million companies buying and selling and getting the food and transporting the food and getting the food from where it's produced to the consumer. And 8 billion people need this product 3 times a day. So it's a big industry. It's also an incredibly complex web of companies that are trading with each other and getting that product to the consumer. And before the pandemic, kind of our food waste story was a cute story, but it wasn't anything that people needed to do anything about because nothing was broken. And then the pandemic hit, and I think everybody in the industry saw that it was broken, that was truly broken. We had the paradox you saw and news stories where people were pouring milk out and they were plowing their produce back into the fields, and at the same time you see at the supermarket and there are no milk or produce on the shelves. So I think the pandemic forced everybody in this industry to actually start breaking open these supply chains that I haven't touched in 30 years, and understanding how they can be much more proactive. How can they actually share data, and how can they share data throughout this very complex web of companies? So for the company's perspective, it was a huge catalyst for us. And as an entrepreneur, you always kind of build technology, build product, get team in place, and then you don't know how long it's going to take before you actually get market traction with the product. And during the pandemic, we got a tremendous amount of market traction. So that was positive, and very positive, I think, also for the industry. Also had a very big impact on us as a company, but maybe we can address that later. But it's a huge catalyst for us and drive huge change in the industry.
Yeah, I think what you're describing also connects to, I really want to hear about Mark's experience, especially in regards to the increased interest in sales in smaller footprint electric vehicles that happened during the pandemic in 2020, especially as people were cooking much more at home. And I'd love to hear, but there was a lot of concern in regards to sourcing and manufacturing key components and parts. So Mark, I really want to hear what was your experience at Arcimoto, when there was concerns in regards to shipping as well as increased demand for vehicles like yours.
Yeah, it's been a really wild last 14, 15 months now, because that shift to sort of relocalizing everybody really was I think a big catalyst for a different look at the Arcimoto platform. We have a vehicle that is focused on sort of consumer transportation. We have one that's focused on last mile delivery, one that's focused on emergency response, all built on the same platform. And that, we launched our first pilot of the Deliverator right before last mile delivery just sort of went to the moon. And that, I think that as we what we're doing right now, communicating over Skype, I mean, this would at one point have been an in-person conference that would have required everybody to travel to it, and instead everyone's getting it at home. We're at our homes talking to each other. I would say that this technology is sort of the one of the greatest advances in sustainable transportation that we've seen in the last decade. And so we had to, on an operations perspective, we had to radically adjust our processes. Everybody went home who possibly could. We had production shutdowns of various lengths in all 4 quarters of 2020. We've dealt with massive supply chain disruptions in the industry as a whole, and it's just keeping up with. You're missing one part, you don't ship a product. So I think that there's been, but at the same time, Arcimoto has certainly benefited from the rising awareness about the electric vehicle, a relook at how we transport ourselves. And I think that, there were many areas in the world that saw clean skies for the first times in some people's lives during the beginning of the pandemic as industries shuttered operations. And I think that's kind of a long-term effect. So that's, it's been a lot to juggle.
With that juggling, there is still the need for you to continue to build out with the growth and interest in both of your companies, and the expansion and interest in the things that you're doing connected to sustainability. I'm really curious how both of you competed with larger companies for talent, especially as there were more remote opportunities. And oftentimes when you're doing interviews, quite often people would come in and meet you in person for interviews or final rounds and, classic conversations about culture fit. So if we could talk, especially when it comes to in the food and electric vehicle industries, which are hyper competitive right now. Ari, would you like to start about how you compete, especially around the world, for different types of talent?
Yeah, it is incredibly competitive out there. We have the big Facebooks and Amazons and the big technology companies that are throwing around a lot of money to get the best talent on board. So we typically start. Everybody who joins CRISP feel that they have a connection to the mission that we have as a company. So we actually kind of go around the virtual table these days, but it used to be a meeting room table, and everybody tells their own story. Why does this matter to them? And that can be a story of growing up in the U.S. With very little money and having to go to the grocery store and sending products back, can't afford it. And so food is connected very closely. Or growing up in a different country, immigrating to the US and then building their career in the US. Very successful executives, but can have a background where they really connected to that we don't want to waste food, and they always wanted to be a part of solving that problem. But how can they actually do that in something that also help? But they also can help build a technology company. Just last night we hired this amazing female leader into the company. She was a part of a company that grew from nothing to 5-6 billion of revenue, and she could have joined any company. Everybody wants her to join join the company, but now it's the next kind of step in her career as well. How can she now connect and solve a bigger problem, solve something that really matters to her? How can she use this technology skills that she has built for 20-25 years and apply them to a very large problem? So I think the connection to a mission matters a lot. We did a survey internally here, and we see that about 46% have an idealistic kind of focus in what they want to do, versus the general market that is 15%. So I think, but at the same time, they also want to apply the knowledge and skills that they have built to a very large problem.
Mark, what you do combines engineering and ideas about sustainability and manufacturing, and also partnerships with a lot of government agencies, as well as, like you said, that last mile for delivery. Could you tell me more about how you're competing with much larger companies or famous names, as Ari mentioned, for talent in these different areas?
Yeah, and I think Ari's, I would sort of echo a lot of the sentiments that Ari expressed. Arcimoto is a deeply mission-driven organization, and to a person, I think everyone coming on board understands that and buys into. We're trying to make a really significant impact in terms of solving the climate problem. And I would say over the last year, it's actually the pandemic in some ways made it a lot easier for us to bring world-class talent onto the team and attacking the problem. And part of it was, Eugene, Oregon is a pretty small town, so getting somebody to relocate out here can be a real challenge. But in the pandemic times, we said, you don't have to move. In fact, you can't. We will, if you're remote, you just stay remote until we're through this. And we really built the processes around being able to work with teams all over the planet. We brought on Monroe and Associates, world-class automotive engineering outfit led by Sandy Monroe. We brought on some amazing talent on the electric drivetrain and battery side, and then just that has been really, I think, an opportunity to be able to collaborate with people without having to uproot and move and take a risk on a small town. So I think it's actually been a real, that's been one of the bright points for us, is being able to work with world-class people on a problem that we deeply care about.
That's great to hear that, often we've heard so many downsides from the pandemic, but it's great to hear the upsides for both of your companies in terms of the recruitment of talent, that can really benefit and make these companies grow significantly as discussions about sustainability continue to become much more mainstream. I think in the sustainability space, there are still a lot of misconceptions, especially with both of you being repeat entrepreneurs and communicating what you do to investors and new clients. I'm really curious, even with this greater awareness that you've both talked about sustainability as a result of the pandemic, what are some of the persistent misconceptions and wrong ideas about especially growth in the sustainability industry? I'd love to hear, especially when it comes to the food space, you alluded to how complicated it is, whether or not it's have you heard about it feeling like too much of a challenge or other ideas like that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple misconceptions. The first one is we are all, as consumers, we are really trained to think about us as consumers not wasting food, and we should definitely continue to think about that. It's an incredibly important part of the whole equation. So it takes a little for a consumer to think about the complexity of a food supply chain to get food to the grocery store or to a restaurant. Often there are 8 to 12, maybe 15 different steps in this value chain. It can be a grower or a farmer in a foreign country. They work with a co-op and they aggregate up all of these for produce or for food, for instance. Now there's an exporter, then there's an importer, and then there is somebody buying it and packaging it together and putting it in their product, or wholesalers and logistics companies. So I think the biggest misconception for us is just for everybody to understand how unbelievably complex these 100 million companies, how complex that structure is. So that's number one. And number two, I think it's just how on earth can you actually change that? So what are the solutions to it? Because the problem is so great, and the problem is such an important one to solve. And the other one is how can we actually have an impact? Where can we start? What companies do we need on board the platform to have that huge impact? And a lot of misconception is also around. Most people believe that large, small, medium-sized companies do not want to share their data because there can be some competitive information, pricing information, and stuff like that. So that was also what I thought before jumping into this industry. The biggest challenge is going to be around getting these large companies to actually share. But the learning was the opposite, incredibly positive. They want to share. There just haven't been any tools in place to share this data. So now that the tools are in place, now data can flow and be much more real time, and it can allow everybody to be proactive versus reactive. We get it out of these silos where data just goes to die and into a place where everybody has access to it. So those are the kind of the big misconceptions that we've kind of run across, but slowly changing it.
Mark, I'm going to give you the quick last word, but I want to reframe the question by saying, what is the misconception regarding the future of the sustainability space before we go?
Yep. Well, I would say biggest misconception is, and related particularly to sustainability, is that people can't change. Ultimately, this is a social networking exercise. If we all lean in, we can fix the problems we've got. And the idea that we can't change our ways, I think, was really put to rest at the beginning of the pandemic, as massive numbers of people radically shifted their behavior patterns overnight. And so I think that the other misperception is that we can take our time. This problem of sustainability is something we got to tackle right now, and we can do it as long as we're all on board.
What we're talking about today is directly connected to the heat waves in California, the Pacific Northwest, and many other parts of the world. It's clear sustainability really needs to be a priority for many more companies right now, rather than several years into the future. Thank you again so much to my guests, Chris CEO, Ari Trastal, and Mark Fraunheyer, founder and president of Arcimoto. Julia, back to you.
Thank you, Karen, Ari, Mark, and all of our speakers today. And thank you to our sponsor, ProEdge, a PwC product. Today, we learned a lot about the importance of talent and mentorship, what the future of work might look like, how growth and sustainability go hand in hand, and what it means to lead a diverse workforce. I hope you were as inspired as I was by these conversations. These are topics we continue to cover closely at Insider, and I recommend you checking out all of our reporting from the journalists you saw today. Remember to share your thoughts using the hashtag #InsiderEvents. In just a moment, our survey will pop up on your screen. We'd love to get your feedback. Please share what your thoughts are so we can make our events better and better. And we appreciate you joining us today. Have a great day.